Good morning, everybody. I hope that you all are well and in good health. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this very first webinar that Feset is organizing and presenting. In these certain and strange times, we choose as a theme for the webinar to focus on what is possible rather than on all the problems or what the COVID-19 pandemic is causing to be impossible. So today we want to talk and discuss about pedagogies of possibilities, the transformative implications of COVID-19 for European social education. And we are very happy that many people take an interest on this really important subject, since we have about 70 participants today from about 14 different European and North American countries even. We have 3 presentations by board members, each of about 20 minutes, and followed every time by some chance for discussion and for reflections. And we will end with closing remarks and some information on the Feset seminar of 2021 by our colleagues from EASEPF in Porto. Before we start, maybe some practical arrangements. As was mentioned in the information beforehand, the webinar will be recorded and available to be viewed on our website afterwards. If you have questions, discussion points or reflections during or after the presentations, please write them in the chat box. I will follow up on them and I will get back with them to our presenters. So I hope we will have a nice and very informative and very interesting webinar. And although it's November 13, we are very confident in the fact that it will all go well. Technically and certainly the interests, the importance of the content. So if you're okay, I would now like to give word to Aoife Prendergast from the Limerick Institute for Technology, who will take us into the Irish perspective on pedagogies of possibilities.
Lovely, that's great. Thank you, Yoka, our president, for that welcome and that opening to the Feset webinar, our very first Feset webinar. And I think it's actually quite appropriate that we're discussing an uncertain time in the world of social education and in social pedagogy. So for the next 20 minutes to a half an hour or so, I'm going to be presenting the pedagogies of possibilities from an Irish perspective. I'm a lecturer here in Limerick Institute of Technology, and I suppose I'm remote working at the moment, like most people here on the call. So I'll talk to you about the pedagogies of possibilities from an Irish perspective, with a specific focus on, I suppose, 3 major areas. And these will lend itself into, I suppose, some of the other presentations that we're going to experience today from Finland and also from Belgium. So I suppose as an introduction, there was lots of things that came in my mind when I started, I suppose, exploring this whole area of pedagogy in a pandemic. And something that really struck out to me over the past number of months has been a quote, you'll see it there on the screen, that viruses don't discriminate. but it's societies and systems that do. And I think it's important for us to reflect on this today and reflect on our own practices in education and in, I suppose, professional social education and pedagogy, and really think about that statement, because we have a role and responsibility and a duty to play in this pandemic. So my task for the next half an hour or so is to really look at the positive and negative impact of COVID-19 on ourselves in education and in pedagogy. And I'm going to spend my time looking at the three major areas which I consider to be important. The first one is the pandemic pedagogy. So I'll talk to you a bit about remote teaching. I'll talk to you about what I suppose innovative methods we've used in Ireland, and you may be able to use the chat function, as Yoka said, to put in some of your suggestions and your ideas, because I'm sure we have a lot of similarities, because I know there's 14 countries that are represented on the webinar today, so I'm sure we have similarities, but I'm also sure that we have differences as well. So I'll talk to you a bit about that. And I suppose another core focus for me in this presentation is looking at practice education placements, because really that has been hit quite drastically by COVID-19, and contingency arrangements that we would have had in place previous to that would have had to be altered, changed and adapted with this kind of ever-evolving situation. So I'll talk to you a bit about that in terms of issues that have emerged in recent times, challenges for practice settings themselves, as well as practice for students. And I'll talk to you a bit about the future and planning for that. And then finally, I suppose I will mention, and this will be, I suppose, littered throughout the presentation, is the notion of there being, I suppose, inequalities in education, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has actually exposed some of those inequalities in education. So I suppose I'll conclude on that as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to go into my next slide, and I know there's a slight delay, so it'll probably take 2 or 3 seconds for this to appear up on your screen. But in terms of the reflections on the COVID-19 pandemic thus far, I suppose there's been really 3 reflections that we can all take as social educators, as social pedagogues. And I suppose essentially when I'm reflecting on the pandemic, I look at 3 major components really. I look at the challenges, I look at the opportunities, and really opportunities for positive change. So not just opportunity for the sake of an opportunity, but looking at this pandemic and actually looking at how we might reconfigure our practice for positive change. So I'll look at opportunities that we can kind of, I suppose, permanently alter aspects of our education system and of our practice as social educators as well. And I think it's really important when we're reflecting to look at the whole notion of mitigating risk. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's taught us that risk is of enormous importance when it comes to education, and it really has put the spotlight on risk, risk control and risk management. So to, I suppose, give you this context of the kind of pandemic pedagogy that I spoke about just a few minutes ago, a couple of things I just want to say here now. I suppose we really have to go back to basics when we look at social education. And when I talk about going back to basics, what I mean is looking at the essence of social education and pedagogy. And when we break this all down and look at the fundamentals of it, it's really the focus on our expertise in social relationships. And this is essentially what has made this pandemic, I suppose, so transformative for us in social education and pedagogy, because we are in a psychosocial crisis. And if we truly harness the essence of pedagogy and we truly embrace the essence of social education, we will perhaps be able to create a social safety net for our clients, for our students, and for practice as a whole. Because essentially what the pandemic has taught us is that us as social educators and pedagogues have huge expertise in social relationships, but also that vulnerable people within society are enormously dependent on us as professionals, and they're also quite dependent on resources for basic needs. So I suppose when I'm looking at this in terms of a pandemic pedagogy, I think it's important to ensure that we underpin our pedagogy with what we consider to be the true values and the essence of social education. And a few things that come to mind over the past number of months have been just our compassionate values. So when we look to the future and we're looking at finding new ways of coping in this type of an environment, it's about looking at our kindness, our benevolence, how we include people in society, how we engage with socialisation, care and welfare, and how we lead and guide people through that. So essentially, social education and pedagogy is not just about identifying strengths in individuals and in groups and also in social networks. It's a function of our society, and it really, the role and the value of social educators reflects societal attitudes in many, many ways. And the COVID-19 pandemic has created this type of pedagogy that is building, I suppose, a sense of community, looking at how practical needs are being met, looking at the actual rights of individuals, how we advocate for that, how we fight for that, and also looking at a dynamic, creative, holistic and compassionate future. Because one example that comes to mind in terms of a pandemic pedagogy is really looking at how we, I suppose, build and create learning opportunities, how we use shared activities, and we use the personal and professional aspects of ourselves as workers to build those relationships. So there can be nothing without empowerment and social connections. A number of things here that I just want to kind of touch on in terms of the pandemic pedagogy as well is we've had to build or adapt our skills for working with individuals and working with students on a very interpersonal level online. And I suppose, having mentioned the essence of social education and pedagogy as being one of that's quite compassionate, we have to kind of view this as a powerful action. And how can we bring that compassionate skill as a powerful action into our work online? Okay, and I suppose a number of different things here, you know, when you begin to reflect on them, we have to be proactive about it. You know, it's looking at compassionate leadership. How does that nurture innovation? And we also have to look at ourselves as professionals and having, I suppose, our personal qualities of motivation, advocacy, I suppose our intent to contribute to the well-being, to the happiness, and I suppose emotional aspects of others. It's really, really central when we're looking at building those interpersonal skills online, because we're losing quite a lot of, I suppose, our non-verbal communication, our touch, and other, I suppose, emotional aspects of our work. So we have to figure out adaptable ways as to how we can improve that and build those relationships online. One other thing I'll mention here around pandemic pedagogy as well is online supervision. And this is just, I suppose, not just online supervision for particular professionals, it's also looking at it from the perspective of students also. And it's something that's quite significant because I suppose the skills that are developed, the kind of, I suppose, the three functions of supervision, the educative function, the supportive function and the administrative function, are being slightly, I suppose, damaged with the online move for online supervision. So it's about, again, looking at the adaptable ways of how do we bring those compassionate values, how do we ensure that we're able to lead and guide in supervision, and really, I suppose, it's putting the microscope or putting the spotlight on ourselves to be able to manage that in the pandemic. So I'm just going to move on to practice education placements, because I know I mentioned that at the very start in terms of this was an area of social education and social pedagogy that really has been slightly, I suppose, damaged by COVID-19, because I suppose more importantly, we're practicing and we continue to practice in the shadow of the virus. And this has created lots of challenges, But it also has created a number of different opportunities for us as social educators, which I'll mention in a couple of moments. So I suppose, first of all, the challenge that it has created for us is the chaos of adapting, okay? And really when I focus on that, I'm looking at how we have adapted to remote working. So how have our students adapted to not working face-to-face directly with clients and directly with professionals, but how protocols were set up on a very, I suppose, swift basis to adapt to the change of COVID-19. But in addition to that, there has also been chaos in terms of extended hours, and I suppose it's extended hours really here of work for students and for practice educators themselves, but also in terms of placements being extended because we are working in the shadow of COVID-19, and that requires us to really look long term at placement education. And if we were preparing for COVID-19 to exist in our lives for the next 18 months to 2 years or even longer than that, we're still going to have to continue to adapt in that chaos. We're still going to have to temporarily, I suppose, adapt to remote working. And really what we're asking of social educators and of students when it comes to practice education placements is to integrate that transformative practice. Okay, so to continue on with that. And in my view, I would view that skill of being able to adapt in these circumstances as being really important for a student's well-being, for a student's resilience. And also it gives them the skills to be able to cope with, I suppose, ethical issues that might arise and other practices that they're going to probably have to implement on a permanent basis. A couple of other issues here I'm just going to mention in terms of the practice education placement has been the disruption to academic systems as well. Okay, and anyone who is familiar and who is working very intensely with practice education placements will know that it's quite a structured system. There can be structured placements. There's I suppose policies and regulatory requirements associated with it. And when COVID-19 emerged on our shores, it created enormous disruption to the academic system of the practice education placement. And in most cases, the focus on digital skills and digital competencies were somewhat, I suppose, ignored up until COVID-19 emerged. And I suppose thinking about that, that's going back to our long-term preparation and transformative practice, that looking to the future student, looking to future placements and preparing on a more strategic level. It's about how do we integrate those digital skills and competencies in preparing students for their practice education placements. And one such skill that I would consider to be important would be a skill for, I suppose, working online with clients, working online with professionals, that whole notion of tele or video working, and looking at I suppose, digital skills when it comes to supervision. So actually preparing students for that, whereas I suppose over the past number of months, students have been just foisted into these situations and have been willing to adapt. I think now is the time to pause and reflect and look at students in the next 2 to 3 years and figure out how we can integrate that. A number of other challenges that I'm going to mention as well, and I'm sure this is not just an Irish challenge, it's across Europe as well. But again, from my own personal experience, I believe that the pandemic has actually created enormous stressors for staff, for students and for professionals. So while we've developed new skills and we've been quite innovative, and I suppose there's been a number of different strengths that go along with it, it has actually created enormous levels of stress and exhaustion. Okay, and I suppose it's stress created by, I suppose, the chaos in its own right of how to manage and how to adapt and how to uphold quality and academic rigor, but it's also creating a lot of stress in terms of uncertainty, planning for the future, and trying to adapt practice experiences. Okay, so I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that today, that additional stress, and I'm sure people on this webinar this morning are under a lot of stress and pressure and fatigue with this pandemic, and it's going to continue on in the future. And again, just going back to what I mentioned earlier about the complex decision making, again, this is another additional stressor or challenge for everybody concerned, because you're making decisions, I suppose, based on uncertainty. And you're also trying to make decisions and I suppose manage ethical dilemmas in situations that are probably going to evolve and going to change. So that has created, I suppose, a lot of issues for everybody concerned. And for me, I believe that there's been a lot of invisible work or labour has been created by the pandemic itself, and particularly with the focus on practice education placements. I suppose there's a lot of invisible work that goes on in placements itself, and this has been really exposed by COVID-19, that, you know, the process of trying to change, try to adapt, try to communicate that with students, try to ensure academic rigour and quality has actually created enormous workloads for social educators and for practice educators out in the community. And the whole question that I will bring up, and it might be quite blunt of me to say this, but there's also a question mark around the academic quality and rigour of practice education placements in terms of COVID-19. So how do we stand over and quality assure placements where there is quite a great deal of remote working going on or online work, and there's very little face-to-face connections being made between ourselves as practitioners and clients and service users. So that's something for us to kind of, I suppose, think about in terms of a challenge. But all is not negative. Okay, I know I've dwelt a lot there on challenges and issues that are emerging, but I think it's important for us to kind of, again, take stock and think about the opportunities for positive change. So at the beginning, I mentioned that I suppose it's about looking at ways we can permanently create that powerful action and create that positive change, and maybe not go back to the way that things were. So one thing that has really struck out for me as being an opportunity for positive change has been, I suppose, the reprioritization of the most urgent and important aspects of people's roles. Okay, so we're beginning to again push back and realize, okay, having that connection is of huge importance, being dynamic, being very compassionate, really thinking about the clients and looking at it from their perspective, having that compassionate leadership to nurture innovation. That's the most important in trying to reprioritise the most important urgent aspects of our role. But also there's another opportunity here with our capacity to adapt to change. Okay, and I think particularly in this area of social education and pedagogy, we do have an aptitude and a competency to adapt to change, and that has really been strongly highlighted in the pandemic. So it's a real key strength of our professionals that continues to happen. I also mentioned earlier on about risk mitigation and risk management, and obviously risk management has always been a huge priority for us in social education, in social care and in social pedagogy. But I suppose now undertaking risk assessments and managing risk is part and parcel. It's an expected part of the role, and students particularly have had to adapt to that very, very quickly. So there's nearly more of an emphasis on it than there was previously, okay? Because essentially we're looking at new environments, and we also have an altered reality to negotiate our practice, okay? One other thing that has emerged, I suppose, as a challenge, and we're looking at an opportunity for positive change here, is that under pandemic conditions, our everyday, I suppose, professional activities have now been regarded as particularly risky, and this links back to kind of our altered reality. So your average home visit, your average face-to-face meeting or supervision meeting, whether you might be escorting service users or clients, or whether you're working in residential settings, this has now become high risk, okay, and particularly in terms of spreading or contracting the virus. So our whole reality has been turned upside down, okay, so the everyday activities are now considered to be enormously high risk. So what do we do to try and I suppose mitigate that change? And I suppose we really need to think of the concept of digital erosion as well, and it was something I came across over the summer months in terms of looking at how the movement to digital skills, digital competencies, the movement to online, how that has, I suppose, given us a test really of social solidarity. And also it's the use of, I suppose, online technologies, and I suppose the ever-evolving social media dilemma and debacle in practice that has really crept up on us, and it was creeping up on us at a rapid rate before COVID-19 emerged. But since the pandemic, it has revolutionised our communication with our students, with our service users and with professional staff. But that crucial role really that we have as social pedagogues and as social educators, really, I suppose it has put the spotlight on that greater need for respect and visibility, because as social educators we have the expertise in social relationships. We're not just dealing with the social relationship, we're also dealing with the psychological impact of the virus, and we're also dealing with, I suppose, kind of the intense household level economic impact of the virus as well. And the reason why I mentioned the whole concept of digital erosion is because we're probably moving to practices that are involving little or no personal contact. And one would have to worry, or one would have to err on the side of caution, that these types of practices might be implemented on a more permanent basis when the virus leaves, because of, we'll say, low costs, little resources required. And that has really exposed a weakness in our profession as well. So I suppose moving on to looking at the future, and having looked at the challenges, having looked at some of the positive actions for positive opportunities, I suppose now it's time to look to how we get out of this, how we move forward, what's our strategy, what's our plan for the future. And we need to have clarity in terms of how we address those issues in an online space, and also be, I suppose, acutely aware of opportunities and dangers that emerge. So going back even to my pandemic pedagogy and looking to the future, I suppose what I'm mentioning here, or alerting you to, is creative, I suppose, and very practical teaching solutions, okay, that have been implemented and that have been considered to replace, we'll say, even a practical practice education placement. And looking to the future, I suppose we have to be more innovative around that and work with our regulatory bodies, work with our national associations to figure out what might be a more creative way to replace the actual practice placement, but that will still give the student and still give the practice educator an experience that will have adequate activities, adequate reflection, and ensure that there's practical application skills related to past experience. So we really have to think quite clearly about the future planning when it comes to the ethical issues I mentioned, particularly issues around privacy, confidentiality, informed consent, dual relationships, the whole dual mandate in social education and pedagogy of care and control, boundary crossing, and service transformation. So I suppose just to conclude, because I know I've mentioned a number of different issues that have emerged as part of the pandemic, some good and some bad, but I think it's important for us to go back to what I was saying at the very beginning about how viruses don't discriminate, but it's actually societies and structures and systems in place that do. Really what this pandemic has taught us in terms of pandemic pedagogy and supervision and practice education placements is that the importance of maintaining trust, privacy, dignity and autonomy in remote relationships with our clients and with our service users is the most important. So that's the most essential. It's the essence of our social education and pedagogy. Those service users and clients are dependent on us as professionals to provide them resources and provide them with that social contact. But also we have to figure out a way of handling our emotions and handling the exhaustion, because this has been continuing on for a number of months, and for us to continue to maintain a high quality of practice and standard, and ensure that we give as much support to our students and as much support to our clients and our service users as possible, we're going to have to look at other ways of, I suppose, alternative ways of handling that stress, that emotions and that exhaustion. And also in terms of, I suppose, a concluding remark too is in terms of policies and adhering to policies in a pandemic. there can often be ethical dilemmas as to whether we break or we bend policies in the interest of service users or the interest of students, because we are trying to be as compassionate and supportive as we like. And I know this mightn't be popular to say, but there has been issues and there has been, I suppose, problems that have emerged in terms of ensuring that we adhere to policies in these emergency times. But ultimately, I believe that with proactive organisational leadership, so again, thinking back to, I suppose, our compassionate leadership, how that nurtures innovation, our dedicated professional staff, and having that scope for organisational flexibility, that will improve the situation. So that's my final conclusion for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed some of the insights and some of the issues that have emerged. I have a number of references I'll put up on the screen here, but I'll push it over for some questions or for some comments. So if you want to put some comments into the question box, I'll be able to have a look at that now, or else Yoka will be able to ask me some of the questions that are there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aoife.
Thank you.
I think you put up many important discussion topics and suggestions for reflections to put in. So, I'm sorry. There is a question, or yes, there is a question by François Gillet,
okay,
who says that this concept of pandemic pedagogy is very interesting, particularly connected with the management of the risk and the opening to opportunities. So he would like to have some more words concerning online compassion.
Okay, and I think that's a really useful and interesting comment there in terms of kind of online compassion. And I suppose really it's about how we transfer our compassionate values, we'll say, of kindness, of benevolence, of inclusion, of care. How do we transfer that into an online context? So when you don't have the, I suppose, ability to have that face-to-face contact, that touch, that informal, casual contact with the student or with a client, for example, it's how do you bring that into an online context? So I suppose there's a couple of things that we can do in terms of creating that online compassion. And I suppose first of all, it's having those casual conversations rather than moving everything into, I suppose, a formal context. Particularly, we'll say, even in the area of supervision, for example. I know supervision can often be a hugely formal affair in terms of a formal supervision session, but I think it's important to break that down and break it up in terms of having that, I suppose, a casual conversation on the phone or perhaps on an online meeting before the actual formalities of the meeting start, because people will have trust. I suppose they'll build up that sense of collaborative practice. They'll build up that sense of autonomy themselves. So I know it requires additional time to build that into our own work practices, but if we're trying to ensure that it's sustainable and that both parties get benefit from it, I think we have to put more effort into the kind of the casual element of our work rather than it all being formal all of the time, because it's something that I particularly miss in my own work, is not being able to have conversations and just very casual conversations with students and with other colleagues and with practice educators as well, because I do think that's nearly the glue that holds things together. You have that sense that you know we're all coming from the same page, and when things become very formalized, I think it does create additional stressors for people, because people feel they have to respond in particular ways. So I think the whole online compassion, it's something that we have to be creative with. We have to create those casual opportunities to get to know people, and that is a pressure, or it's a burden on the system at present.
Thank you very much, Aoife, for your answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aoife. Jay says that he or she, I'm sorry, I don't know, agrees with the fact that compassionate leadership is the key to all this. And could you elaborate a bit further on that? Because of course, all the issues that people, clients, students, lecturers are confronted with in terms of compassion values, compassionate skills, of course, is not easy to adjust or to use when you're in a leadership role. So maybe you can elaborate on that a bit further.
Yeah, I can do. And again, another really important point. And I suppose when we think about compassionate leadership, we nearly, I suppose, think about it in terms of the values that we bring ourselves, and that we're all of the kind of that same ilk, if you like. But obviously, when you're in a position of leadership, you have to, I suppose, make fairly complex decisions based on things like, I suppose, scarcity of resources and budgets, etc. And it can be a very difficult or tricky position to be in. But I think when we're looking at how we might expand that, or how we might support compassionate leadership in practice, I think we need to look at a number of different things. And the first one would be in terms of motivation, okay, or even will. And we need to, I suppose, have motivation to relieve, I suppose, the suffering that people are experiencing at the moment, and not just, I suppose, to relieve it, but also to have the empathy to understand that there is difficult situations that people find themselves in. People are suffering, and really, I think there's a responsibility on the compassionate leader to advocate and to raise awareness of that. Okay, so I think it's not just good enough just to acknowledge that, okay, this is a problem, this is an issue, this is suffering for people, but actually you need to act on that, because we're never going to improve situations if we don't address the emotional aspects of the problem, and also look at individuals in we'll say a higher education institution or out in the community, where we don't look at kind of our own kindness, our own empathy, and how we encourage that. Because I don't think it should be left to individuals, particularly social educators or pedagogues, to just take up the mantle for that. It needs to be demonstrated by everybody in kind of every role that we have. And for that to really truly exist, I think we need to be proactive, and we need to ask questions of our leaders and ask them, are they properly compassionate, and what is their motivation, and what is their role in terms of advocating and raising awareness. I think often, we feel compelled in social education just to maintain the status quo and just to go along with things because it's an easier life, or we don't want to create a challenge or a problem. But COVID-19 has taught us that we do have to be more stronger in terms of our advocacy. And if we are, really supportive as social pedagogues and as educators, we would be doing more of that. Be asking more of our leaders to respond. So I know it's not an easy solution. I'm not posing an easy solution to the question. It's quite difficult, but I'm just maybe more thoughts for reflection with that. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I can see in the chat that that the issue of compassionate values and skills is an important one. So I will read.
Okay.
A question by Michelle, and which was answered partly by Louisa, but I think that you can also put them together. So okay. Michelle says that as a pracademic, by which she means she has a foot in both worlds, the academic and the social care practice. And I will read it now. I find laptop fatigue can be an issue in terms of maintaining the motivation to remain creative, supportive, compassionate for educators as well as for supervisors and students. And the question is then, how do you think that we can ensure this can be managed and maintained in the long term, which is of course a challenging question. And one reaction is that students by Louisa, this is that students need to be equipped to manage the fast pace of change in their personal and professional lives, and that developing the capacity of students to think more creatively is the key to adapting to change and embracing risks. But however, to do this effectively, creativity needs to be embedded across all the social care programs.
Yeah, gosh, and there's so much. Yeah, thanks for that, Yoka. And gosh, there's so much there, but really, really strong insights coming out there from participants, which is fantastic. And just at the start, I know you mentioned the concept of pracademic, and I'm delighted that somebody has mentioned that this morning, and that people, I suppose, are aware of that concept of having, again, the foot in both camps, because that creates conflicts as well in this COVID-19 crisis. But I suppose I'm just going to focus on a couple of things with those questions in terms of laptop fatigue and students not being motivated in the long term, as well as kind of the fast pace of change and creativity. And I suppose my view or perspective on that would be that we're only seeing the consequences of the transition to online or remote emergency teaching now in the past, I suppose, number of weeks. So I suppose we really had no idea when we moved to everything to emergency online teaching that there would be this level of exhaustion and this level of stress and a level of panic, which I probably have never seen in my own lifetime. So we're only getting to grips with it now. So we're identifying the problem, and it's about figuring out what might be possible as a solution or as a coping strategy for the next number of months. And the only things I suppose I can think of at the moment are, again, it goes back to that compassionate leadership in terms of really being clear that when you cannot transfer 100% of face-to-face learning and learning opportunities 100% over to an online medium, it's not going to work. And we've seen that in terms of some of the questions that have emerged today with laptop fatigue and everything that goes with it, that it's impossible to transfer everything completely. And I suppose we have to be quite honest with students and honest with ourselves that it's not the same. It's very, very different. And we cannot absorb absolutely everything. So it may mean that we have to reprioritize what students learn in an online environment and actually maybe scale back on some of the pedagogies and perhaps some of the content, whether it's in a practice education placement or whether it's in your average module. But perhaps we do have to look very constructively at our own curriculum and figure out what is the most important and how best can we teach that in an online capacity. And I know management or even leaders would have a difficulty with that because they will say, students need to have access to absolutely everything and we have to teach them in the same way as we would face to face, but we're not really being true or genuine to ourselves when we say that, because I would prefer students to gain a number of specific skills from myself or from other people rather than trying to teach them absolutely everything and it's going over their heads, it's becoming overwhelming and they actually don't want to be in social education or social pedagogy anymore. So we really have to kind of, I suppose, pull back a bit, you know, quite to a large extent. And I suppose there'll be other things that will be emerging over the next number of weeks or next number of months with the pandemic pedagogy. But I completely agree with those participants and their comments there in terms of that level of fatigue. The lack of creativity that this has created are things that are just tipping the surface now, and we really have to support the students. And it goes back to what I said earlier about having that extra time to have those casual conversations. So we really need more hours in the day or extra help to improve the situation. But I completely accept people's frustration at the moment in terms of the exhaustion and the stress that this is creating.
Okay, It was a very compassionate answer, Eva. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we have 2 more minutes, and there is a question of not especially to you, Eva, but I suppose that we can start answering it. And I also would like to invite participants to answer to this question in the chat box. It's a question from Marseille, from our colleagues in France. And it's about what you also mentioned in your previous answer, which says, and it says that we are talking about the risk of a large number of professionals leaving their job, and asking what the situation in your countries is. So maybe if you can start answering, and then I will give some word to Francois and Eva to elaborate on this further. But please, everybody, make your put your answers in the chat so people can have a look on that. Thank you.
Oh, okay, lovely, Yoka. And yeah, another really important challenge that has emerged from the pandemic. And bonjour, I'll say to everybody in Marseille, and thanks for joining us. In terms of, I suppose, the Irish context, about professionals leaving jobs, I'm not aware of there being a huge increase in people leaving jobs at present, but I am aware with particular agencies of staff that are quite exhausted and quite burnt out. So the increases in, we'll say, sick leave, for example, have been quite striking over the past number of months. And maybe it will be in the next 6 months to a year that we'll begin to see people leaving the profession as a result of the pandemic. And maybe also this is an issue in other professions as well. If we look to our colleagues in nursing, for example, or our colleagues, we'll say, even in medicine or in physiotherapy or occupational therapy, they're under the same pressures, I suppose, as ourselves in social education and pedagogy. And I'm sure we've all had experience, anybody who's involved in education as well, where you reach that point of kind of sheer exhaustion with the laptop and with emails. And I don't know about anybody else, maybe it's similar in France or in Marseille, but the explosion of emails and meetings, online meetings in the past 6 months, I just feel some days that my own laptop will explode with the amount that's coming through. And if we were back in kind of pre-COVID situations, we wouldn't have that same volume of work. So I think as a whole, as a society, we are kind of, I suppose, clinging on to our work, and a lot of people, I suppose, are at breaking point at this point when it comes to exhaustion. So I think there needs to be some kind of reflection done on that in terms of how we can manage this, because you can manage anything for a number of weeks or a number of months if you know there's an end point, but with this pandemic we can't see an end in sight, and I definitely can see why people are questioning their careers and questioning the choices in their job and probably looking for other opportunities. But it's definitely a problem, and maybe it could be a topic that we might discuss in Porto as well, because we probably have more information about that and more research on that. So that's definitely something we can think about.
Okay. Eva Timonen-Kallio is one of our board members who is working in the Turku University of Applied Sciences in Finland, and she will be taking us through a European perspective, perspective, I'm sorry, on digital pedagogy. So go ahead, Eva, and good luck.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I mean, show the title, please. The first.
Eva, can you
slide.
go to the title?
Yeah, there's just a delay. It takes a couple of seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
Let's not get stressed over the online.
Well,
Could you try it again, Aoife?
Okay, I'm just going to go back one slide.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So my title today is Uptaking the Mindset and Approach of Digital Pedagogy. So, Oifa, thank you for giving us in a way, the big picture of the situation and pandemic situation for social educators, social pedagogics, and in social professions. And you told us how the situation is changing, the working practices more and more happening online, and you were asking or presenting the difficulties or challenges in how to learn online compassion and encountering in online or online. So now I will present to you today one European project, Erasmus project, which is called Empowering Residential Childcare Through Interprofessional Training. And in this project, there are partners from Finland, Italy, Lithuania, Spain, and Germany. In our project, there are several objectives and goals, but today I am concentrating the one of those, which is to create an evidence-based teaching module to foster needed competencies. And main thing is that this teaching module is a MOOC. You can change the slide. It's the MOOC, which is massive open online course. Probably you know this already, what MOOC means. It is an online course aimed at unlimited participation and open access delivered entirely in internet. So there are, of course, it makes some challenges to think about how do you learn encountering and making relationships online. So our idea in our project is to offer improved access for RCC training across Europe and even worldwide. So our ethical idea or perspective here is that when we have noticed in our countries that there are some lack of professional competencies and professional competitive staff in residential childcare in children homes, we noticed that there is a very, very serious need for this kind of training. And well, we started already 1 year ago, and now we have noticed that the corona situation has showed that our project is very actual and current. So after professional analysis in partner countries, we have find 4 or these 6, 7 core competencies that are very important in training residential childcare workers, social educators, social pedagogues. So you can see that these are quite general actually for every social pedagogics or social educators. But in our case, of course, the contents for the work, for the workers and the actions made the special content and perhaps special pedagogy to train these modules. So we will have 7 modules, and you can see there how we have divided the competencies, like involving family of origin. It's very important. Assessing and evaluating RCC process, transforming crises and conflicts into learning opportunities, also creating educative and therapeutic relationship, and model of participation in education and care. And there in the middle there is developing reflexivity and calibration in your actions. So you can see that these are also very general. If you general competencies, if you think about the work of social educators wherever they are working. But we, as I said, we have this context working context RCC as a background. So here for you is one concrete way to plan online teaching and learning. So we, in each of these competencies, we have the same template for planning the training. So you can see that one unit means 27 study hours for a student. And when I said that we have found the competencies, or we have made some analysis to find the competencies. So this whole learning module is about learning competencies, not like just knowledge, but it's learning competencies, which means skills and being active, being able to act, and of course knowledge also. But the starting point is that to learn competencies. So you can see there the elements or components of this planning. So when you are planning online learning, you need to first of all think, how do you do the introduction in online? And I remind you that this Erkki MOOC is entirely in internet. So there is no moderators, there are no teachers. So this is really a challenge. How you make students to learn. So what learners can accept? A map of concepts. This is the first element in each unit. The second one is activation. So motivating, setting up the learning problem online. Documentation, a collection of materials and resources for learning. And the last component is the reflections. And here you can see one example of those competencies. It's creating educative and therapeutic relationship. And you can see the introduction here, which is that residential childcare is defined as an intervention that takes place in the interaction between children and residential staff. Thus, the core element of RCC work is relation-orientated encountering, in which an RCC worker is a service of growth, creating educational, therapeutic, and trusting relationships with an attitude that every child is unique and has special needs. The well-being of the child is built in relations. Thus, care and education is always relation-based. So it is essential to feel empathy, but at the same time maintain a professional distance to respond adequate in relationship. So you can see that this is applicable for, or you can apply this attitude in wherever you work with clients. So the overall learning objectives here is when you are creating educative and therapeutic relationships, learning objectives are that you have skills to build a process of creating relationships, importance of starting and closing it. You will understand behavioral, emotional, and developmental problems of the children, and so on. You changed the slide already, Oipa?
Yeah.
Excuse me? Okay.
Yeah. Just it's a bit of a delay, just a couple of seconds.
Right. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
So in this case or example, you can see that when you have this overall learning objectives, then you need to divide it in units. And we have done it like this. We have 3 units here. What's therapeutic? What's educative relationships? The second one is educative and therapeutic relationships during the RCC process. And the third one, you as a key worker, creating a reciprocal trust with an individual child. Please, can you go back?
Yeah.
Because there are the competencies which are included in every unit. We can't read them now. Oipa?
Can you see them now?
No, it was the previous one.
Okay, go back.
Okay, here. So this is important. When you are putting the introduction to make the learner to be motivated and interested, you need to, when we are online, you need to show them what the learners can accept, what kind of skills, what kind of competencies. So in this first unit, what's therapeutic, what's educative relationships, you will know the differences between therapy and therapeutic educative relationships, and you will be able to identify the basic principle in creating relationship with vulnerable children. And the second one, unit, educative and therapeutic relationships. So what the learner will accept, what kind of competency skills she or he will learn. You will be able to understand how to maintain educative and therapeutic relationship during the RCC process. And the third one, competence, which the learner will gain from this module, is that you will familiarize yourself as a key worker and so on. Okay. Activation, documentation, application, reflection in all these units. And this is the very need much of working, much of imagination and creativity. You can see that, and I'm sure you have some experiments how how much you need to work with these issues to make students, learners to learn. So there are just just few examples what it might be, what there can be. So we are in the middle of this work now, but I just want to show this as an example and perhaps as a template and tool for you to plan online learning. So we have found that key issue in planning online learning, designing the MOOC, which will be delivered entirely in internet. So key issue is planning. And there is, as I said, no moderators and teachers. So the question is how to motivate, how to learn, where to find learning material, resource, what learning tool in use, how to give and get feedback. And we have noticed that in our partner countries, universities are actually in different position in uptaking online teaching. Thus, the technical challenges are quite big and large for us, have been. And as I said, this needs a lot of time to make and search all the learning material. So we have counted that even one unit can have 10 different kinds of learning material. So altogether, if we have 5 modules, it's or 5 units, it's 50 in one module. So a lot of work, a lot of planning, a lot of need of imagination. And well, just want to remind you that less is more. It's easily to put so much material and to make links for the material in internet, but remember that less is more. This is what we have learned during this process. So this is really a new approach for learning and teaching, the online digital teaching and learning. And of course, this is you have, I suppose, you have already noticed it's that when we are forced to teach everything in online, this is also a new role for teacher to build in learning environments and building different platforms or working in different kind of digital platforms. So it's always also a new role for the learner, of course. So just like to emphasize or invite you to visit our website if you like to hear more or be with us during this this development process. This all will be ready in the end of next year, and so please visit our website and you will see more about how to develop online learning and more about the substance, the content of competencies in residential childcare. So here are I want to recognize my Erasmus partners who have designed this learning, teaching, training module and produced learning material. So perhaps you can find someone from your own country and you can contact and discuss more and be with us. And I'm sure that our finalized, completed MOOC will be handy and beneficial for your training. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and get some ideas and hints and actually the concrete planning tool for you to plan online teaching and learning. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eva. Sorry. I hope that everybody could hear me very well. Thank you very much, Eva, for this
Thank you.
very informative presentation. There are some discussion points and questions that were put in the chat box. So I will start with the last one, which is a question from Jay, who asks, why are there no teachers or moderators?
Yes,
in
because
the MOOC?
Yes, this is how the MOOC is designed, because our idea is that it's usable for across Europe, even worldwide, and it's this is how we are supporting and helping the RCC trainers, teachers. We are in a way offering the whole package, how you can teach your students or learners even in continuing training. So this can be a one component, for example, in one course. So there can be also the own teacher who is taking this package in his or her learning module. So it can be like, or use like a hybrid model. So part of it is entirely in internet, and then combine it to another course.
Okay. Thank you. A discussion point raised by François Gillet is that concerning distance and proximity, the so-called social distancing is a real learning opportunity. If there are also opportunities for speaking about it. It's a bit out of scope maybe of your presentation, but can you elaborate on that somewhat further, on talking about social distancing as a learning opportunity?
Well, is it about online pedagogy? What is this? What she or he?
Eva, my question is.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
My question is about. I think that this opportunity that you are living now, social distancing, could be a kind of a good exercise to have with the students in this online teaching. What do you think about that idea?
Do you mean that this makes this social, I mean this online learning make teacher and students more distance?
No, the situation that we have now in COVID times, the general social distancing we are living now, it's a little bit a general question, huh?
Yes, so no, sorry. Can anybody else, maybe Oifa, did you got François' meaning?
I know with the social distancing, I'm not so sure I understand the question, François.
Yeah.
Yes. For example, I think we have a lot of situations in social pedagogy where, as you explained very good, Oife, where the social distancing is changing the challenges. We have new challenges because social distancing. And my question is, how can we speak about that question with our students in the present times?
Yeah, no, now I understand you. And maybe it's something that needs to be highlighted as one of the bigger challenges. Obviously, social distancing has created an environment where we are now delivering everything online rather than face-to-face. And secondly, when it comes to, I suppose, practice education placements, that is causing a problem because students and practice educators are practicing in the shadow of COVID-19. So it has altered the way we, I suppose, even the way we position ourselves with other people. And I cannot see that changing even in the next number of months, or even in the next year or so. So maybe it's something it should be integrated perhaps with students' preparation for placement, is the importance of the social distancing and looking at alternative ways of trying to communicate with other professionals and other clients or other service users, because this is going to be a major part of our practice going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Eva. Okay, let's go to the last presentation so we can keep up with our time schedule. And for this final presentation, François Gillet from the Higher Education Institution in Brussels, in Belgium, will put forward 7 questions on what education becomes in COVID-19 times.
Thank you very much, Jo. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to meet you, dear colleagues from Feset. Feset, European organization, as you know, but in the same time a little bit international organization, because we have also some participants from other continents today.
And excuse me, could you put the camera on? Or?
Yes. Excuse me. I think. Do you see me now or not? Oh no, we have again that problem. I have sometimes a problem that I'm not so visible. You see, I'm looking like a phantom a little bit. I'm the black silhouette of today. I had all this problem this week. I don't know what happens. Okay. So you will just see my two, my face and my two. So we will try to do so. My proposition for today was to come with the questions for helping us to think not only on the pedagogical dimension of what we are living in COVID time, but a little bit to connect this pedagogical question. And I think it was very well treated by Oife and by Eva, who spoke a lot about pandemic pedagogy and about how we work with practice placements, what Oife did, the distance learning, what Eva was speaking about. And I would like to open a little bit the reflection and to have the possibility to reflect with you about those 7 questions I had in the head when I was proposed to speak today about our situation in COVID time. So as you see, my introduction was concerning education and educational pedagogy. We have to look on, I think. First, how do we conciliate the relational dimension of social educational work and the reality of COVID-19 pandemic? So I think that was already said, this question. The relational dimension is a very important thing in our job as social pedagogues. But to be aware that it's an everyday practice. Relation is something that happens every day when we generally meet people, when we eat with them, when we are having activities or interactions with them. It's a very concrete relational dimension. And for that question, this concrete relation is today very suffering. So that's a good question to ask, and I think it was already made today on very interesting formulating. And I had also this question including COVID time is conducting to more inequality. We have a lot of examples in social work and social education. When we are working with kids, we see that some kids are more capable of having relations in these difficult times, and other kids have very big problems. I think can be psychological problems, can be relational problems. So it's a real inequality that we can see there. Same for homeless people. And homeless people, of course, most of the time have no computers, have not always smartphones and such things. So for her, they are perhaps still more disconnected that they were already before. And with elderly people, that elderly people was a very big problem in this COVID situation for most of the countries. How do we cope with them? We know they are particularly in risk with illness, but also on the relational dimension. And probably the first wave of COVID was a big problem for elderly people because we didn't took enough in consideration this relational dimension. We was, of course, for emergency concentrate of sanitary challenges, and we didn't see enough on the beginning what we call the syndrome of glissement in French, this syndrome of all elderly people who become more and more alone, more and more isolated. And that probably conducted to a lot of death that we had in the societies in this population. So the relational dimension is very important. So for all the people we are working with, and of course for the workers who are suffering particularly. We spoke a lot about the suffering of the nurses, of the people who are giving medical cares, but of course the people giving social cares, as we are also suffering. And we saw in the chat questions about do we will see people leaving the social jobs. It's a very good question to have in mind, and as trainers and as teachers in universities for social workers, it's something very important to have in mind. How do we do for transforming the motivation of our students, for having the pleasure to being with people, working with them concretely, to have discussion and activities with them? How do we transform this motivation by our students for being still motivated for doing this job? This is a big question. Second question I wanted to bring to you was how do we do in school and universities? It's more on the pedagogical question now again. For balancing the presential and the virtual. We know that it's a discussion in Belgium. It was a discussion every month. Are we green? Are we orange? Are we red? And connected with this level of emergency, how do we combine the presential and the virtual? I think it's a very important point to take in consideration in our pedagogy. And particularly in the activities who are connected with professional practice. We spoke about online supervision, about practical placements, negotiation and contract signings in those situations. Also the seminars, for example, we had this week an international week. It happened in Antwerp when we had students from all over the world also who were exchanging on seminars, and it was very interesting to see how they were motivated by discussion of ethical dilemmas connected with COVID situation. They had a lot of things to discuss. So that's why I think it's very important to know that this tools, these numerical tools that we use now can be useful for this, but in the same time we have to transform the practice. For example, discussing ethical dilemmas was for us very useful, but discussing ethical dilemmas on numerical way was very nice. It was a nice experience, and we did it very well. And also because the subject was typically ethical dilemmas in COVID times. So it was a very interesting experience. So we have to adapt to balance those two ways of working. How and when is it possible to be presential? How and when is it possible to be virtual? Okay, but especially how do we relate the two? How do we don't present those two ways as two different planets, but as an interactive system that will produce the best balanced results? Third question, so you see that, no, the third, not the fourth. Can you put the slide before?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Third question is what's about more and more screens in the professional life? We spoke about laptop fatigue in our discussion today. This is particularly important for people who are working already a lot with laptops. But today we have a lot of research done about the effects that it can have on mental, physical, affective health in general population at every age. For example, we spoke about elderly people, particularly for them, this is not only a question how to use and how to have the material, but also how can I really enter in this kind of communication with my personality, my age, my situation, and my education. There is a very, how would I say, transition to imagine to go more and more in a screen, or sometimes to say I have to go less and less in a screen. And as Eva say, a small, not small is beautiful, but less is the best. It's very important today concerning screen communication to feel when a more or another is necessary, but also if a less is necessary, and sometimes also to say I cut the communication, so I cut my laptop or I cut my smartphone for this day, for example, because it's very important for me also to be sometimes in another way of communication or without communication. And I connected this reflection with the one we had in Aarhus. I remember we had a discussion about heart and hands, because our Danish colleagues of Feset was very aware of this, that education is something of head, heart and hands. And of course, with numeric digital communication, we have a problem with that. Huh? The head is there, the heart, if we develop our online compassion, could perhaps be sometimes it works, but the hands are very far, and that's really a challenge for us as social pedagogues.
Okay, Francois, sorry to interrupt you. Just a small reminder that you still have 5 minutes. So,
okay, I will. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
I will treat the other questions more like a whole, I will say. I can treat this like a whole, because the big question that I propose in those last questions is not to be only a pedagogue, a social pedagogue, but also to have a political awareness of what is happening today in what we call a sanitary crisis. Okay, it's a sanitary crisis, we are very aware of this, but we know also that this crisis is connected with the other ones. You know, we say that COVID was probably started with some, we call zoonose, so illness, viruses that could be a little bit developed by contact with animals, like we have a lot of other pandemics that were happening before, connected with contact with animals somewhere, somehow, and allowing virus to be new and more dangerous. So we know though that the sanitary crisis is connected with economical crisis, with ecological crisis, cultural. And I think it's important in our teaching also to try sometimes to reflect with our students about that. So we are living a sanitary crisis that is very big problem for the whole humanity, especially the Occidental humanity. But also, how can we try to take this opportunity of having such a sanitary crisis that touches everyone? Because the other crisis before was perhaps a little bit less touching for everyone. But today, this all different crises touch us particularly through this sanitary crisis. So, and it would be my last word from this. I think it is point number 6 on my slide, that crisis is danger plus opportunity. So opportunity, of course, to find perhaps other ways of doing social work, social education, but perhaps also opportunity of being more aware that we are living in a kind of end of cycle in our occidental societies, and we need to go to another way of looking on what is society, what is the economy, what is education, and this opportunity is for, I think, one of our responsibilities for the next months and next years. And we can do this through discussions, but also through concrete actions in mobility, energy, housing, agroecology, social and shared economy, who will concretely help us for going to the new way of organizing the societies that we all need with a big emergency now. It's time we have to do this now in those years who are coming. We can't wait anymore. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very open to your questions and discussions.
Thank you, Francois, for this concise presentation and very important questions that you ask. I don't know if somebody would like to go further into one of these 7 questions.
Can
Let
we
me
have them?
Sorry.
Can we have them in the screen? Oipa, the questions. Okay, thank you. Maybe the Francois, what do you think? The first. Okay, here they are.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jay says in the chat that it was a very interesting presentation, for which many thanks. And there is an agreement that there is opportunity with virtual, but also important to protect the good aspects of the non-virtual. Maybe you can elaborate on that further, Francois. For myself, and it's about the same thing. I had a question. Do you have some ideas on how to reach that balance between the presential and the more virtual teaching? Because I think that we're all struggling with that balance and with the awareness that in the future we hope that we can work on such a balance, in the sense that presential teaching will be possible again, but also that virtual teaching will become one of the moduses in which we will work and learn and teach in the future, and not just go back to 100% presential teaching.
Yes, I think this is real the big challenge of this year. We never thought about this 3 years ago, for example. We spoke, yes, sometimes it's interesting to have a little e-learning session and so long, but it was more like a little part of the thing. And today we are because this big balance between presential and virtual. So first, I want to answer to Jay that of course it's very important to protect the good aspects of non-virtual, because it's really a kind of I would say also political challenge today that we have, that if we want to be citizens together in a society, we need to have moments and place where we can meet together and exchange in the non-virtual dimension. That's very important. I would say, for example, last week in Brussels, the students had a virtual march because they wanted for asking for more money for universities and so on, and they made a virtual march. So it was really funny to see this virtual march. It means that they were supposed to march somewhere. It can be in their garden or where they want, when they have a garden. It can be in the street or so. And all the kilometers they made was counted by an app they had on their smartphone that could and register them, send it to a central, and then they send to the minister, we have done a million of kilometers. So also on virtual something can be made, but of course that is not the power that it can have in the real one. For the pedagogy, it's the same. As I said, the important is how do we connect the two, and how do we have some words with our students, speaking about, for example, what was the difference, speaking about an ethical dilemma, doing it online, doing it in a group with in a local together. You see, so we have to speak about it. It's very dangerous that we just go to the system because the system said it's practical, it's more efficient, it's proved and so on, without being critical. We need to be critical about what we are living, and I think we can do this with our students. It's a very good lesson to make.
And Francois, could you also elaborate a bit on how students see this balance? What do they think about it?
Yes, I can just speak about what I see in Belgium. In Belgium, we really have a lot of students who says, for what was in big auditorium before, big lectures and so on, for us online teaching is possible. It's not the best solution, but it's possible, and it's sometimes even better. They say this for the big groups teaching. But when it's question of a little group doing together, group working and group discussions and exchanges in little groups, that it's not so clear. They say sometimes we need really to feel what the other are feeling. We need to see to feel their presence. So it could be a first answer about that. We had a big study in our university college about what the students are thinking about all those, but it's not only for social pedagogy, so I have no precise number for social pedagogy. But in my idea, what I hear from the students who are choosing social pedagogy are perhaps suffering particularly about the situation because it's a very important part of their job that is cut.
Okay. May I have some words? So
sure. Go ahead,
I'd like
Eva.
to go back to the issue about analyzing our curriculums and to look through if there are some content and subject which are really very suitable for online teaching. And For instance, in our university, in my university, we have a training program for social educators, which is really entirely in internet. So the students are all over the Finland, and they can participate to education. And only thing which is not happening or delivering in internet is practice educational placements. So every other issues, other content is in internet. And of course there are teachers and there are moderators during the program. And so this is one optional path, study path for students to choose. And those students who have chosen this one are very satisfied. So they like it very much, and they think that this is a very pedagogically also very good solution for them. So this is the way where we are, and this is the situation where we are when we are comparing and finding the best solution, how to teach and what are the student groups and what are their needs and favorites, study models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Eva. I think that it's similar to the experiences that a lot of us have in this balance between virtual and presential teaching, but that all the advantages of the virtual teaching have become more clear to people, lecturers as well as students, and maybe we're not just really at a point where we can value all these advantages of the virtual teaching, because we've had a bit too much of them. I refer to Eva's presentation where she talked about the stress and the fatigue that this online working causes. So, but of course, this is in the context of new crisis, chaos, etc. So I hope that we can all find a time well, during the course of the next months to come to really reflect on what are the advantages and how can we use them for the best in the future. So this will help us in finding, I think, this right balance. So thank you, Francois, for putting forward these 7 very interesting questions, which we can work on in the next, and we will have to work on, I think, in the next coming months when we take up our responsibilities as a social educator, as an academic, or as a lecturer for social educators in training.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now let me just see, there is one other comment in the chat box. I'm sorry, I missed it earlier. I'm just reading it now. So it's from Teresa from Portugal, who says that supposing a MOOC learning program is designed for students, how can the dynamized learning activities and differentiated learning experiences for users, meaning the learners, without teachers or moderators as well as feedback, contribute for students? I think it's more of a question for you, Eva.
Yes, this is really challenging work, and to get feedback and to give feedback for students. So this is more like we say it like self-feedback, self-assessment, self-reflecting, and this is also what needs to be planned. And but you have several tools for that. So you can have a quick quiz or assignment or reflective questions, and for instance you can have questions there, and you also have the interpretative hints to tell the students when they gave their own answers, and they tick the button, and after that you can see the interpretive alternative answer. For instance, that this is from the professional who have worked longer time as a social educator. So it is more like self-assessing and self-feedbacking.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it is. Okay. Thank you. I think that we are ready to go to the final conclusions or remarks from this seminar. And I hope that I can invite Gabriela from Porto. Okay. I'm sorry. It seems for now that it's not possible. So I will go back to I don't know if you could just in 1 minute or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, put some very remarkable things that we discussed or that came out of the presentations that you can go through them.
Yeah, so I suppose there's been a mixture of different really valuable insights in terms of the pandemic for us as educators, and also from the student perspective and the professional practice perspective. Also, a number of different things that have emerged over the past 2 hours or so has been, I suppose, the similarities in people's experience across different countries, and particularly I know in Eva's presentation she focused on looking at MOOCs and the possibility of not having, I suppose, face-to-face tutors or face-to-face lecturers, and computers essentially taking over the role of pedagogy, which is very, very interesting, and I'm sure we're going to have more discussions about that over the coming months and in the years to come, because she focused a lot on kind of, I suppose, the multi-dimensional element of social pedagogy and social education. And I suppose Francois looked specifically at a number of questions that the pandemic has created, and even in terms of the relational element of how we're having a disconnect with that at the moment. So everything that we, I suppose, know and we cherish and we nurture in social education has been disconnected and removed, but people are adapting very well in relation to the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of positives we can take from our own pandemic pedagogy in terms of our ability to be resilient. But at the same time, I think people are reaching the point where trying to maintain that level of commitment, that level of dedication, and that level of compassion. There's fatigue setting in across, you know, all educational institutions in Europe and across the globe in general, and amongst professionals who are facing a lot of difficulties in their job and in their role, and we move into an uncertain future. But I suppose I'm confident that people will use this pandemic as an opportunity to, I suppose, develop certain skills and actually seek out social support from colleagues and from professionals and from leaders as well. So I hope to, I suppose, to close the concluding remarks with this first webinar that we've had, that there's plenty of possibilities, and I hope people can take comfort in that everybody is experiencing much of the same thing, and we're all trying to do our best to manage it. So I'll leave it at that for today, Joka.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. So some few more words on the Feset seminar which is scheduled in May from the 10th until the 12th. It was postponed. You all know that due to the health conditions that the COVID-19 pandemic caused worldwide. So we decided to postpone the seminar of 2020 to May 2021. So we are looking very closely now as an organization, as Feset, to all the signs of how this pandemic is evolving across Europe. We will decide in the coming weeks, aiming for like December 10 or 15, to decide how we will be holding the seminar, the next seminar, if we will do it physically in Porto or that we do it online. So we are preparing for that, and we are very aware that we need to decide on this this year, so people can prepare and organize themselves for that. So as soon as we decide, we will provide additional information about it on our website, and also through an email message for all our members and participants in our activities. I think it's also important that you know that the scientific committee of the seminar will open a new period for calls for communications. Of course, always with the same content as the previous one, and that abstracts that were already accepted for the 2020 seminar are accepted also, of course, and just are postponed to 2021. But we will ask reconfirmation of your willingness to present the abstract in the upcoming seminar next year. So all the information you will find it on our website very soon. We engage ourselves into that and making it very clear on how that we can proceed. Okay. So don't hesitate to email us or to give us a sign, to ask a question about the next steps that we will be taking. So for finally closing, I want to express my sincere thanks to the three presenters, Ife, Eva, and Francois, for sharing with us their interesting insights and expertise and knowledge. I also want to thank Ife for the technical setup of the webinar. It has been some kind of a challenge in the past few days, but it all went very well and very smoothly. Thank you for that. And I want to thank you all for taking part in the webinar, for your ideas and for your input. So we hope to see you again in some modus in the near future. So everybody, please take good care of yourselves and have a nice day and an upcoming very nice weekend. Thank you.